Hello, my name's Julia Jeffrey, and the title of my presentation for this online version of the Scottish Pagan Federation Conference 2020 is Isobel Gowdie, Historical Witch and Modern Muse. And I should say very briefly to introduce myself, I'm an artist. I'm based in Glasgow and I've been doing work dealing in magical themes for the last couple of decades. And I'm probably best known for the artwork I've done for tarot cards. I'm speaking today as an artist, not as a historian or academic. And my particular connection to the subject comes largely through a project that was an artistic collaboration between myself and American musician Gillian Chadwick. Firstly, I must say I'm really sad not to be in the beautiful Pleasance Theatre for this and not to see your faces. However, there is one major silver lining to doing it this way, which is that through the witchery of modern technology, Gillian is able to join us from Philadelphia. So we can turn it into more of a conversation and you can hear about our project from both of us. One more point I must make at the outset is to say that this was intended to have been very much a visual presentation, not just me reading a lecture. So sadly, you won't get to see the images projected up enormous on the lovely big screen of the Pleasance stage as planned, but we will be providing links for both the artwork and the music that we'll be discussing today. So to begin with the bare facts, Isobel Gowdie was put on trial for witchcraft in the town of Aldern in the Highlands on the 13th of April in 1666. And the record of her unusually full testimony survives, largely thanks to the work of Scottish writer and antiquarian Robert Pitcairn, who preserved it in his book Ancient Criminal Trials in Scotland, that was published in 1833. Now, quite a lot of documentation of the witch trials does survive, so why Isabel's stands out and has such resonance and why it inspired this project involving years of work and numerous crossings of the Atlantic for Gillian and I is what we're going to get into today. So in the title of the presentation, I describe Isabelle as a modern muse, and she's certainly been that for us. And there's plenty of previous fairly well-known examples of her in this role. Most meaningfully for us, the song Isobel Gowdie by legendary 70s Scottish rock group, the sensational Alex Harvey Band. Verses from her testimony also appear in the song The Fabled Hare. It's by Maddie Pryor of 70s folk rock pioneers Steel Eye Span. And there's an operatic piece, The Confessions of Isobel Gowdie by James Macmillan, and several novels and plays. So at this point, I'd like to welcome my creative partner in our Isabel-inspired project, Gillian Chadwick, who, as I said, is joining us on the phone from her home in Philadelphia. Gillian, welcome to this virtual Scottish Pagan Federation Conference.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here in some capacity from my living room in Philadelphia during this lockdown. And I think that probably I should start by talking about the timeline of our project and how it is that we chose Isabelle, why she was our muse. So Julia and I met through the wonders of the internet and our shared love of a lot of aesthetic and cultural things. And one of those was the music of the 70s and the sort of giant prog albums. So at some point, I got it in my head that I should write a concept album, and Julia, wanted to see if Julia would be game for doing the artwork. So we had in mind full on, over the top, complete concept record with paintings for every song. And
completely on board for this.
Luckily, she said yes. So what remained was for us to decide what should inspire our full record. What was a rich enough topic for us both to really want to dedicate that much of our art to. And Julia suggested Isobel Gowdie, who I had not heard of. I think she's not maybe as well known in America, but she was instantly just an obvious choice. So Julia, what was your relationship with Isabelle? Because You already
Yes.
loved her before you introduced us.
So mine went back quite a lot further because I first came across the name Isobel Gowdie and got to know her story through the song that I mentioned, the sensational Alex Harvey Band song. And my dad had the record, the album framed that song is on, and would play it in the house when I was a little girl. So I knew her name from the age of about 5, and
Mhm.
was fascinated by this song. I think maybe quite a lot of certainly the people who would be at this conference today will know the band. And they, like I said earlier, they are Scottish rock legends, and it's
Mhm.
an incredibly dynamic, dramatic song and quite
Mhm.
scary for a little kid, actually.
She does not do
The
what
things
she
she
should. She
should.
should, yeah.
That is the key line. And so I would hear it in the house as a little girl, and then when I was a teenager, I would still listen to it, and obviously having a slightly different relationship with it all at that point. And I, for a long time, had wanted to do something creative, something artistic, inspired by Isabel, and I'd never quite got it off the ground actually, and until this kind of divine inspiration, this kind of moment of meeting of ludicrous ideas that coming together, where we said, let's do this.
Yes, and she's so my background is in rock and roll, and my band X Reverie has always also explored magical themes. So as well as in my life, that's been a love of mine. So she was a natural fit for that. And I think the thing that makes her attractive to so many different artists, well, there's a few different factors, but I would start by saying that defiance that's in the main line of that song, which is, she does not do the things she should. This is a rebellious woman, and so historically, Julia introduced me to her testimonies, which are just unique in how absolutely voluminous they are. And a lot of these testimonies from that era are as sad and upsetting as you would imagine them to be. Obviously taken under duress. I'm sure Isabelle was not in good conditions either, but there is a there is a spirit to her testimonies. She spoke at length, and so we get the picture of what her life was like, what her this magic that she's doing with the devil, and she doesn't seem to be holding back. I think that's a major feature.
She so doesn't. And
Doesn't. And
as you say, they're voluminous and
yes.
unusual in so many ways. And something that struck me recently in preparing to do this today was
Mhm.
that a really simple but I think really important way that they're unusual is that they're in the first person. And
Mhm.
I've been reading a lot of witch trial testimonies lately, preparing for another project that I'm currently working on, which is another tarot deck with the Witch Sister Tarot. But in researching for that, I have been reading a lot of testimonies, as I say, and it's more than ever actually made me appreciate how unusual, almost unique Isabel is. And yeah, it's a first person narrative, which so few of
Right.
them are. I mean, a lot of them are kind of lists of
Right.
complaints, accusations, and
Mhm.
complaints leveled against the person on trial, rather than any kind of first person narrative. But not only that, she's almost like a bard in some ways.
She
She's a
is. Yes.
performer. She's,
Mhm.
giving you this story, and everyone in that room was going to have been riveted the whole way through.
And to me, I think that there is such a defiance in that.
Mm,
When you think
mm,
about the historical context, this is a woman whose life is on the line, and
mm.
um, she's just absolutely regaling these religious persecutors
She's making the
with
most of every second in the
ab-
spotlight.
just, you want to know what me and the devil did? You know, I'll tell you in detail. And so there's such a spirit to that, and then the actual content of her stories too gives us so much detail. There's spells, there's specific spells in it. There's descriptions of her and her coven going off and doing, malicious acts. Um, there's all kinds of very, very raunchy, very sexual details, which is perfect for rock and roll. Um, and also, again, even her adding that in this context to me is this great act of sort of feminist defiance. In the face of I imagine most women in that situation would know that their chances were not good once they were
Hmm.
there. So, to me, it reads as this truly brave and joyful act.
Well,
And yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was just
No.
going to say, like, touching on feminism and defiance, and brings me kind of back in a way to the title that I gave this today, the modern muse aspect of it. And I was thinking about what are the qualities that inspired both of us in this project that I
Hmm.
kind of identified as modern, and it got me thinking, are these modern qualities, or are they just timeless? And they're
Mm.
I mean, some of the things that I kind of jotted down, one of them was like voraciousness. It's this
Yes.
appetite for life, for food and drink. There's quite a lot about food and drink actually in the confessions.
True. Yeah.
That the coven, when they kind of go out on their raids, they can take whatever they want to eat and drink from whoever's house. And there's this
Mm.
bit where they steal ale from a neighbour's house, and then they piss in the barrel to fill it back up. This sort of gleeful bad
Yes.
behaviour that
No
she
holding back.
delights in regaling us with. So there's like physical appetite type for food, obviously like sexual appetite. She's
Hmm.
very unabashed in enjoying the kind of orgiastic encounters with the devil, and like the confession 3, there's like a lot of that. It's kind of like almost a utopian love-in with the devil,
Hmm.
and
It is. Yeah.
and
Very complicated relationship with the devil, but
yeah.
she seems pretty happy about.
But I think
Uh,
looking back on these things, they seem surprisingly modern. But I'm not sure if they are, or if they're just, if it's our distorted picture of people of the past. But
well, I think that raises the point again about why it's unique and why it's so
mm,
inspiring is in this context of her speaking, um, we get a vision of a full human.
mm,
Perhaps because of the circumstances that she was in, she didn't hold back. And I think that most of what survives from that time, we get this idea of just very repressed, very oppressed peasant type women. They don't have a voice. And Isabel, as this possibly final act, we don't know. There's no record of her actual execution. So I prefer to think of it as, she somehow flew away. But through that, through her, possibly being pressed to the 11th hour of her life, she lets she lets us see like the full desires, the full hungers, the full extent of her humanity, and her humanity in a supernatural sense. Yeah, we don't get that.
as you say, for a poor woman, a peasant woman of the
Yeah,
17th century, for her words to be recorded under any circumstances is a
right.
huge rarity. And that was kind of where I was coming from a bit with the title, again, with her being a modern muse. Just the fact that here is a 17th century accused witch inspiring art in the 20th and 21st centuries, and that seems to worthy of discussion for that alone.
Absolutely. One thing I would speak to in what I found particularly inspiring about her as well in a magical context is that when she speaks about doing magic, with her coven, with the devil, with the fairy king and queen under the mountain. It's a very everything with her relationship with the devil, with the kind of magic she's doing. It's ambiguous, or it's both good and bad. And I think that is a really fascinating look that is interesting for magic today as well, because we have this sense that there's a very sanitized kind of modern witchcraft where it's all,
Yeah.
just being commodified, and it's all positive, which of course that's probably the best kind of practice, in my personal opinion. But at the same time, it's a very precious look at what is supposed to be a very primal force,
Yeah, it's all
and
very
so
white light.
it's
Yeah.
it's all white light, it's
Yeah.
good vibes, it's a little disingenuous on some levels as far as I'm concerned, and it's certainly not fodder for a full record's worth of material, because the realities of life have a lot of good and bad, and the full picture of being a human and tapping into the power of magic, the power of yourself, is the idea of reconciling and harnessing all of these different energies inside of you. And so I think that Isabel's magic is dangerous, and that makes her all the more interesting and powerful, because she is doing malicious spells, but she's also doing healing spells, and
Oh,
she's having
yeah. I mean, she's
her.
out and out malefic. There's a
Oh,
lot of
absolutely.
murder. There's, you know,
Cursing crops.
absolutely
Yeah.
killing the laird's children by
Yep.
means of like a clay image, and
Hmm.
they're up to some serious badness. But
They
that
are.
that is, like you say, that complexity of dark, unspeakable deeds, as
Hmm.
well as things that you can just revel in along with her, is what gives her that whole human,
and
yeah, just
and
that makes her compelling.
and it's a look at witchcraft that I think is still very relevant today, which is how does one encompass the different sides of humanity and of this power. So Isabel's the fact that she's not a safe witch was very interesting to me. She's also not outright evil, because that would make it seem like they were just feeding that to her, that's what she had to confess to. But her spells are rich with all kinds of different intent. So there's a transformation spell, there's flying spells, there's talk of, yeah, cursing the laird's uh, children and fields, and her relationship with the devil is equally complex. And I think that was a very, very nuanced and rich topic to explore. um, it's not just that she's under his thrall. It's not just that they're in love. It's there's issues of domination and submission and power, and she's the whole coven is under his power, but at the same time there seems to be her rejoicing in that. I think the idea that we really worked with, the idea that I worked with lyrically or as inspiration, was this thing of, there's talk that maybe she was a peasant woman who was married and probably had a pretty arduous existence, probably not a lot of freedoms, probably not a marriage that she was thrilled with. I don't think that it's necessarily great chances that it was a love match and she was really well taken care of.
There's the image of her leaving the marital bed of a night
Right,
to
right.
go out with the coven and leaving a besom, like a broom, in the bed behind her,
Yes.
with the implication that her husband isn't going to
Right.
notice the difference.
That's right. Yes. So we get a pretty clear idea of her marriage there, and so this idea that she escaped this unfulfilling marriage to go have this very complicated sort of S&M relationship with the devil, is another thing that's not safe. It's not easy. It's not often explored, and that just made it all the more interesting to me, because she is not just as somehow she found power in that. Obviously, you have the devil as the main member in a coven. He's in charge, He's the object of their affections, but within that, you see that she also seems to become very empowered, and that is just a real mind twister that I think is so inspiring and so worth thinking about and trying to to
And
puzzle through.
it is a very complex and at times troubling love story, but there is a strange
Right.
love story in the middle of this material, and was amazing kind of creative fuel, I think, for both
Sure.
of us.
She says she has. There's a whole part about her saying, "I will know you
Oh yeah,
by
she
by the sound of
speaks
your voice."
so
Beautiful.
poetically about him. Yeah, that he would
Yeah.
come to my housetop in the shape of a crow, or like a deer, and I would know him by his voice and go forth to him. And
Right.
yeah,
Which is love poetry,
yeah.
and that's in this in the context of this very lurid, raw power sort of coven orgy stuff is um, it's just so nuanced, and we get this picture of her as such a nuanced human being and a woman with all of these different drives, um, and expressing them in this in a supernatural context. Yeah, it's so much to it. Um,
Should we say a little about um, kind of our sources in a way? So we had this
right.
initial conversation and decision to do this, and like for all the reasons that we've just spoken about, really. But then, so then, where did we go? We had. I'm thinking about what we drew upon,
Sure.
and I mentioned Robert Pitcairn, and his his is probably the version of the testimonies that I looked at most. But we
Right.
did. I think both of us also spent time with an amazing book. The Visions of
That.
Isobel Gowdie by Emma Wilby, which is a kind of doorstop book on the subject,
Deep,
and
yeah, deep tome.
yeah, and ranging over like territory that we didn't get into because it is an academic book and it's fascinating, but I think we both found that we were getting led down so many different
Mm,
channels. She goes into comparisons with shamanic tribes,
right.
and yeah, people. So we got to a point where we decided, I think, that we had to put that aside,
Mm.
and
But she gave us a good sort of socio-political
mm,
picture of what Isabel's life would be like, because before that I only had ideas of her as just very sort of cartoonish fictional character from a previous era. But this goes into a lot of detail about what life would have been like for someone in her probably low station in that era, which really changes everything when you
it really it does.
listen to
You're
it.
well, for me, my kind of visual picture of her also changed
Mm.
on reading that book. And this might be a good point. I kind of wanted to touch on this rule that we made for ourselves fairly
Mm.
early in the project, which was to not to include anything uh, like lyrically reference or have an image of in the artwork, anything that wasn't actually in the confessions themselves. And this
Mm.
sort of came after we kind of things snuck in that we then thought, oh God, that's kind of coming from a secondary source or so.
Mm. We'd already started when we decided that.
But
So yeah.
and I feel like happy that we kept the bits that we wanted to, but yeah. So like for example, the red hair that gets
Yes.
mentioned.
So the song Isabelle was the first thing that I wrote for the project when we first decided to do it. And I think I was going on probably some Googled page, some maybe like Angel Fire page somebody had written in the early 2000s that just gave this. I'm not even sure where they would have gotten it. This what I thought was sort of a description of the story of Isabel Gowdie, but it was more of her living in a kind of being a princess kept in a tower, and this redheaded beauty living in, you know, married off by her father to this older, wealthy man, and she's gazing out her, I don't know, castle window. I mean,
I think there are a
so
bunch of novels that use her name, and
yes,
yeah,
I have one of them.
yeah,
It's incredible Pulp Fiction sort of, nude cover. I love it. But yeah, so that idea, I mean, that's a very different person giving those confessions then. That's somebody of educated and moneyed background, um, escaping this wealthy life. But as we discovered more and really just decided to go from her confessions, that picture changed to something much darker, which makes her rise, so to speak, that much greater.
absolutely. And the extreme humbleness really of her
Hmm.
background and surroundings. And I, I was thinking about something that snuck through that kind of for me was oh, and this partly came from I had this dossier that because I wanted to do something inspired by Isabelle for so long, I had a good friend, our friend John,
Hmm.
made me this brilliant artifact years and years ago, and he'd kind of photocopied all the mentions he could find of Isobel Gowdie in kind of general books on Scottish witchcraft and from Sir Walter Scott and everywhere, and put them together, and then artificially aged this and kind of drew runes
Beautiful.
on it, and it was
What a gift.
yeah, and I kind of showed Gillian about it this thing in the early days. But anyway, I think it was something from a book that I had found in there, and it incorporated the transformation spell that also is in our transformation song, uh,
Hmm.
the "Hair, hair, God send thee care" verse. But it
Hmm.
added a whole load of extra verses, one of which was about a mouse, and I can't remember exactly how it went. It was something, oh, I will go into a mouse and haste me into the
Hmm.
miller's house or something like that. And I started drawing lots of mice, and I had all these
Right.
sketches of mice that I really liked. And then I discovered that that verse isn't in the testimony.
No mice, no red
No
hair.
mice, no mice, no cheeses for us mices.
No, no. Yeah, but that, I mean, that again speaks to just how many people have been inspired by her and how easy it is for some reason for for us to plug into her story and make it our own. And I would say that in my process, I made the record. The lyrics are all in first person as well, and they are incorporating a lot of different spells and lines from the confessions. But for me to really dig into the topic, I also connected it to things in my own life. And that is, that's the nature of a true muse, is that I saw things in this woman from such a different era and such a different place that just hit me in my gut. Things about love, things about relationships turned cold, and the desire to just rage out and be bad and have power that you don't have, and the beauty of magic and of all of the natural world. So I think, yeah, I think that it's always going to be a blend. We decided to stay as true to the actual confessions as we could, but I think the fact that some of other people's inspiration crept in just speaks to Isabel's universality. Yeah.
Absolutely. And at this point, maybe I could ask you to say a bit more about the songwriting process in general and how you approached it, like what where you started from with
Right.
these, because it's there's 7 songs, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, just what were the seeds, and how did you then
Sure.
make them grow?
So for me, songwriting is, of course, writing music and also writing words. And what I tend to do is have all these different kind of song seeds. I call them, musical pieces, little bits that I'm attracted to and that I keep in my pocket. And then I work on lyrics, and the lyrics and the music need to match up in some way that feels right. So to work on Isabelle, I had to reach for the things that spoke to me in her life and the things that she was saying and how they spoke to me in my life. So I picked, the first song is this almost sort of introduction. It ended up being the song Isabelle, which was written from this very secondary source. But it gives a little bit of the overview of her making a run for it and leaving her life for the devil and the power in that. And so, for example, for that piece, I wanted it to start as this kind of a folk influenced melody, something that's sweet and clean. And then as she feels more and more repressed, as she sort of runs into this stranger on the road, this dark stranger, and she decides to just go for it, it turns into a very heavy riff
It really
piece.
takes off, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
like all restraint is gone.
So I'm trying to capture with the lyrics, but also
Mm,
with the music, the
mm.
feeling of a little bit of sadness, a little bit of like beautiful kind of courtly music, and then just the raw power
It's
of,
got this
of
fabulous
riffs.
wild crescendo.
Yeah, guitar solos and distortion pedals, and making that change from one life to another. And both of those things are things that I love. I love the folk, and I love the heavy riffs. So, but then there were pieces like, so for example, Transformation Song, which we've already mentioned, because that one is a piece that is really directly from the Confessions. So she has the spell, right? And I'm elaborating on that with the rest of the lyrics. But so, for example, she is talking about turning into these different animals. It's a chanting sort of spell and transforming into different animals. And there is a sense of kind of running in a circle and transforming. I will go into a hare, and then it will send me back again. So I wanted it to be musically that turned into a round. So it's different voices going around also in the circle. The lyrics are chasing themselves.
And it's
So
so
those,
layered because there's so many different layers of voices and
right?
giving you the sense of like the various different transformations and also a hint of like the coven, like like different
Exactly.
witches.
Yeah, I tried to use a lot of different group vocals in part because her coven is a big part of the story.
Yes.
She's not just talking about herself.
Oh, there's so
She's
much
talking
about the
about,
coven again and
there's
again, and
lots of
they're
different members of the
named, and
coven.
some of them really come across as characters as well. You Jeannie Martin, the
Absolutely.
maiden of the
Yeah.
coven, and various Bessies. There's like a bunch of Bessies.
Bunch of Bessies. Yeah. So I wanted it to have a sense of not just being a single voice throughout the record, but that there is a group element. And also with the layers, with it being around and being in layers, we're imagining a scene where there is magic happening. So it's not a clear linear sense of time. It's not one thing and then the next thing. It's a sort of interdimensional experience. You can imagine these things layering on top of each other. She's transforming from one creature into another. So I wanted it to be. I also wanted it to have the sense that when you're listening to it of it ramping you up and getting you in that kind of ecstatic state. The idea of a sort of whirling dervish, because that's another magical state that you can go into. This ecstatic
And
peak
it's
that a
really there
transformation would
in the song.
would
It
take.
builds and builds throughout the song. You really feel it. It's a kind of
Yeah,
visceral
whirling.
experience listening to it. I find
They're
it.
they're different states of being, and you'd have to reach a peaked dervish kind of state to enact your magic. So that's so trying to get not only the trying to have the music be kind of true to what's happening as much as possible, but also trying to put the listener in the kind of headspace.
Into that state.
Yeah, the magical spell
Mm, mm.
state. And then there were other songs like there's some pretty heavy tunes on there, and those I tried to match with some of the heaviest, kind of most badass moments of testimony. So there's a Endless Flight, which is a very dark riff driven song, and that's when the coven flies to to hang out with the king and queen of fairy under the mountain, under Downey Mountain, with bulls gnashing their teeth at the gates, which I just loved. And then there's also Red Reaver, which is very much, I'd say, the peak of the darkness of the record, both in the art, I think, and in the songs. She's pledging herself to the devil. She's pledging her body to the devil, and it's a very intense, heavy riff.
It's quite frenetic, Red Reaver. It's quite
Fast,
fast and
heavy,
yeah.
just full nighttime church in Eldern, devil, hand on the black book, really as dark as it gets. And then the last song, White Dunes, ends with it's more of the love song. It's more of the love story of her deciding to give herself over to the devil, and in this beautiful way that we've already talked about, which is there is a real love there. And so I wanted to speak to that. And the second half of the song, which is the close of the record, is a very tranced out sort of psychedelic jam.
It
It was
gets
very much
really hypnotic. I
hypnotic,
think that
right?
section with all the voices, it's not really lyrics, it's just vocal sound, but it's really, it is trance-like.
That was very much a product of the band as well. I came to the band with the song, the first half of the song, and the idea of the riff that would go through the hypnotic second half of the song, and then the band all put that together.
And it
And
might be good here to say a little bit
yeah,
about the
right.
band, about the other musicians playing on this record, and how that came together.
Yes, yes. So originally, when we spoke about this some years ago and started writing it, I assumed that I would be recording it in Philadelphia, um, with an American band, because why wouldn't I think that? Everyone wonders why I did not. But as the process went on, I was touring with another project, and I got to meet you, Julia, for the first time, and uh, ended up visiting again, and ended up, through your incredible inspiration, playing a show of Ex Reverie songs with a band that you and Justin put together. And it was fantastic. And as work continued on this record, it just became more and more clear to me that I'm writing an album about a Scottish witch, and it's very much a product of she's very much a product of her place. And so I'm a visitor to that, but it just became more and more of a natural fit to make it in Scotland and to make it with Scottish musicians. Put together a band, and we ended up recording it with Alistair Mitchell on bass and Stephen Douglas on drums, and Justin putting the whole band together and shredding those leads and co-producing with Luigi Pasquini. And
And
um,
just to say,
yeah,
Justin is Justin Lumsden, and
yes,
he is amazing guitar player. He's my partner, which is how he ended up getting roped into this. And
yes.
his amazing band Big Hog are kind of Glasgow fixture, but he kind of masterminded the
Mm.
project of putting together the recording.
Hmm. I really lucked out. I got these incredible, the super group of Glaswegian musicians. And I will say one of the great joys of this project for me was that we got to record it through the mobile studio in
Oh,
Straven,
the,
in the shadow of a castle, a
yes.
ruined castle.
In the old
It,
mill, in a 17th century mill building.
I mean, to an American, you can't even imagine how how rare and special that is. We don't have castles everywhere, and I miss that. So it was the perfect setting, just dark, rainy, moody castle shadow. So yeah, it was a beautiful, beautiful session. And yeah, so that's how the actual recording came together. The songs were mostly written, I'd say about
Mhm.
90%. Of course, the band contributed just enormous amounts of their own talent, and people writing their own parts. And Yeah, so the ending of White Dunes, the ending of the record, is also kind of the culmination of that band that came together for this
Mm,
project, really working together. And I wanted it to be, I mean, it was better than I could have imagined it being, but I wanted it to be the, again, an entry into the magical state.
mm,
And that's what this hypnotic, sort of psychedelic experience can be
mm.
musically, is a kind of access to a magical
Yeah,
state.
absolutely.
Um, so yeah, trying to fire on all
Mm.
levels, connection to the material. And how about you? How did you work with the painting process?
Yeah, interesting. It's very different story, I guess, from the writing and recording of the music because it's so like, on the whole a solitary business,
Mm,
and obviously the writing is too. But my work is very figurative. It's all about the face and the body, and so an interesting thing about this was I work with models. I generally work with models, and Gillian, you modelled for me
mm.
as Isabelle, which was another
Yeah.
interesting kind of further interweaving of the two halves of this project. And so
Yes.
we didn't have a lot of opportunities, although you've ended up kind of coming to Scotland quite a few times now. I think we just did a couple of sessions where I would
Yeah.
set things up and take photographs, which I then worked
Hmm.
from to give me enough time, basically. That's how I tend to work, just because people don't have the time to model for hours on end, sadly.
Right.
Um, and I, again, kept coming back and back to the testimony and different scenes, but I was seeing things in terms of poses and figures and
Hmm.
what positions would the body be in, um, and yeah, just facial expressions too, and then I
And
just kind of like a bit like you, just kind of going through that material and going, okay, what have I, I've tried a whole bunch of things. What's sparking something that seems to evoke this character, this story, this moment.
mhm.
Um, and like we did some things that we did improvise some stuff with this deer skull that I happen to have in the house, and so the
Makes it on the cover.
yeah, and yeah, there were some great poses of you just holding this deer skull
Mm,
aloft that just kind of gave me chills and thought, oh, okay, there's something here to work with,
definitely.
and the transformation song image that came from a session that we did in your former home in Providence, Rhode Island, where I
Right.
first visited you when I came to the States, when I crossed the Atlantic the
Hmm.
other way, and I kind of had you doing these sort of crouching,
Hmm.
feral, animalistic poses, like suggesting that there's this fight and flight situation that Isabelle finds herself in when she, in the shape of a hare, is running from farmers' hounds who are going to tear her to
Hmm.
pieces, basically.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so yeah, a lot of just kind of um, trying things out with um, coming up with poses and then kind of mulling over that in isolation, seeing what works and what doesn't work. Lots of sketching
Hmm.
and discarding, and then kind of refining things. And I had this battle with myself. I really wanted stupidly, I think now to do it to do the finished artwork as etchings, and I've only ever done one etching in my life at this point. So what possessed me to think that I could possibly do that? I don't know. But
We were not thinking small with any
no,
aspect of this
we
project.
really didn't. We really didn't shy away from extreme, grandiose ideas. Following in the footsteps of Isabelle,
Exactly.
and
Yes.
I really looked into it, and it was only because I couldn't afford the size of copper plates I would have needed to
Right,
do it,
right.
that kind of put that out of the question, and it's a good thing that it did, or I would be a complete basket case. So, but I wanted to have something of that feel of like an etching of, like,
Right.
so I settled for a compromise of ink drawings. So they're large, they're mostly pretty large, but they're ink pieces, and I started with kind of sort of sepia-ish. It's not actually sepia. It's bistre is the name of the color, mixed with black, and it was these two particular inks that I
Bistra.
bistre, yeah. So,
Perfect.
and yeah, so I did these large pieces, and I encountered technical difficulties even with those, really, with the
Right.
size, and the piece for Endless Flight. Oh God, that was a complete nightmare because
Mm,
I think it was completely my own fault, because although it was this very large piece, I was doing it. I was stretching the paper, and it's split.
mm.
And not only once, but it split, and then managed to fix it, and then it split again.
Yeah.
And I thought that after having done like days, weeks of work on this huge piece, that I was gonna have to throw it out. But I did manage to repair it. But that was an ordeal.
Yes.
And after that, I worked on illustration board,
Right, right.
which kind of removed one terrifying nightmare. But and that did actually make life a lot easier. And why I didn't do that in the first place, I don't know. It was, but you live and learn.
Yeah. And a project of this size definitely took us through different stages and
Yeah,
changed as it went. Um,
it really did. It really did. And I'm trying to think of other significant aspects of the art process.
well, we there might be a good moment to talk about how we decided to make it. So collaborations are can take many forms, and
Mm,
this collaboration was really interesting because we both kept complete autonomy over our halves. So you painted what you wanted to, I wrote the songs I wanted to, but
absolutely.
we, which is important, an important distinction to make with a collaboration,
Mm,
because sometimes it's completely intermingled. But the art half was completely yours, the music half was completely mine. However, the communication and the back and forth was constant. I was sending you lyrics as you were making the paintings. We were discussing what I should write the next song about.
absolutely. I
Um,
think it's a really weird, very. I think people don't do it like this. Really, I
mhm.
think generally in these sort of projects, it's like somebody will generally probably would somebody would write the music, and then an artist would come in and interpret
Right,
it,
right. But
illustrate it. Yeah, but
we were doing them in real time. We were
we
doing them at the same
absolutely, and
time with lots of input from
yeah.
each other.
No, there was a real
And
kind of like ping pong across the Atlantic Ocean of ideas, and yeah, the
definitely, and in the same sense that I ended up modeling for Isabelle, I also had you sing,
oh yes.
as much as we could to get your voice on there. So we did try to blend as the collaboration while having these two halves that were whole in themselves. We brought each other in and brought Isabelle in different ways into our lives and onto the paper and onto the recording tape.
Well, we both got so up close and personal with Isabel in this project during the course of making it, and I think those aspects where we both kind of it sort of came out of our little separate areas and crossed into the other person's world where we're really part of that and we're important for it. And I know, and also it was amazing for me and a kind of huge privilege as a fan of Gillian's music to get to do a bit of singing on
Well, we
some of
had
the
to get your,
songs.
you definitely had to have your voice in it. I mean, that in more ways than one, you know, our voices crossed into each other's
Oh yeah,
mediums.
definitely.
Yeah, and might be a good moment to say our joke, not joke about the project, which is that over these many years of working on it, we we started to get the sense that I think that we were invoking Isabel, and that
Uh-huh.
maybe we had done so a little bit too casually,
Yeah.
and certainly doing a thing of this grandiose scale, with an ocean in between us, and with our own, you know, our own need to sort of make a living and live a life. Otherwise, there were moments of us just kind of saying, Isabelle, is that you? Is that you tearing the paper? Is that you with this blizzard? Is that you with this strange sounding mix coming through these monitors? You
There was
know, all of these
definitely
technical difficulties.
disaster as well as triumph
Mm,
throughout the process. There would be like moments
yeah,
of wonderful serendipity and beneficent feeling magic, and then also just like,
absolutely.
what have we done?
Yeah, yeah.
Isabel smites us.
My personal life imploded while I was over to record the album, and I thought, you know what? If that's the tithe I pay to Isabelle for this record, it's worth it. And I think that's the sense that we both had this just endless respect for her as a human and as a force. You know, this historical force that someone becomes when their words last so much longer than their lifespan. And we both, I think, tried to realize that we were paying for what we needed to pay for what we were getting from her. And that's, you know, in some ways in these like calamities, but also just in love and respect, and do right by her and try to do right by her story.
I mean, you're so right. We did constantly through the process kind of make this joke, not joke, about Isabel and the tithe. And well, I think in the end, we gladly paid it, whatever it was. And
Definitely.
this is maybe a good time to say that we completed it. We did
We
it.
did.
We did
We
it.
did.
And it
Came
took
out
a
May
long
May
time. I
1st.
think it took years longer than either of us expected,
Hmm.
and there were many delays. And as I said, plans fell through along the way. So, but yes,
Hmm.
May 1st last year, finally
Yes.
we released the end,
Tangible,
yeah, the end
tangible, completed
product
document.
of
Yes.
this, which again took not exactly the form that we initially envisaged, which was to have been a vinyl record. So
Hmm.
we have not achieved that as yet, but we brought out a package, the album on CD with an artwork booklet that is it's not album size, but it's
Eight
uh
by eight.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot bigger than a booklet that you would have with a normal CD. The booklet is
Hmm.
is is like over twice the size of the CD. So it's like a goodly size
Hmm.
for the images, and we were really pleased with the end product after
Definitely.
uh, all.
And the reaction. It's been wonderful to see how many people care.
Well, it was. I think the final, maybe perhaps, hopefully, the final, the final mishap of that was that I had intended to have the finished product with me as a kind of launch at last year's Scottish Pagan Federation conference in Edinburgh, and
Yes.
and it should have worked out. And we had all the stock, and Gillian had sent the CDs that were produced in America had been sent like weeks before and
Mhm.
got
Held
held up in customs.
held hostage.
curse them.
Yeah.
So that was kind of angsty last minute. So we did not have them for the conference last year. But very shortly after, we did, and had the really satisfying, wonderful experience of having all my stock sold out. I think within a couple
Mm,
of days, we'd done a sort of smallish run to begin with. So that just felt like a vindication of Isabelle
absolutely.
and of our project, our kind of labor of love.
Well,
Um,
yeah, when you pour so much of yourself into something, a project like this, it's an act that you're doing for yourself. You know, the artistic hunger has to be satisfied for its own sake. But wow, what an amazing feeling when other people care about it.
I'm so good, so good, so
Best
good.
bonus that there could possibly be. So I think it's, I hope that the music and the art and the efforts that we put into it, I hope that's what's appealing to people. But I think that it's also Isabel's story, and this same spirit that we've been speaking of this whole time, which is that there is so much in her story and what she gave by giving those confessions that can speak to people absolutely in 2020,
So true.
just as relevantly, and help you. It's a lens through which you can see your own life, and you can see your life in the story, this very extreme story of this woman's life.
And in closing, I kind of want to say that this is by no means the end for Isabel
Hmm.
or for this project. And looking to the future, there is going to be an exhibition in the Nairn Museum in
Yes,
October, and which feels so fitting. I'm utterly delighted about this, to have been
amazing.
approached by the curators from the Nairn Museum to show the artwork from the project there. And there's going to be a series of tie-in events around this exhibition. There's going to be workshops involving foraging
Wonderful.
and witchy plants, and nature workshops, and hopefully
Perfect.
musical events also connecting to this show. And we're still hoping that there may possibly be a vinyl edition in the future. But we'll, through the various
Yeah,
social media outlets, keep
I think there will
people
be.
posted.
Yeah, and
And
have you over here and do some music and
yeah,
art uh, exhibiting together.
that would be so good. I would love that. And I'd want to share one little memory from an event in Edinburgh that I spoke about Isabel at in November last year, and took one of the large pieces, the transformation song piece. So I got that framed, and it's got all the lyrics from the song on it. And so this event was in the Scottish Storytelling Centre in Edinburgh, and they've got a
Mm.
beautiful big exhibition space that the things were set up in, and it's kind of next to their cafe. And I was helping set the show up, and there a young dad with a little toddler daughter wandered through, and I think he was just kind of keeping her quiet. She was getting a bit fractious, so he's like, "Come and look at the pictures," and they walked right up to the transformation song, maybe because it's got a hair, so it's like, look at the bunny. And the dad started speaking the spell that's
Oh,
in the
wow.
lyrics, that's on the piece, and the little girl was just really focused on it, and I could hear this little toddler, and she's muttering, "Here, here, God send thee care." And I was like, "Okay, next
There it is.
generation. There goes
That's the
Isabel into
seed.
the future."
Yeah, the seed that Isabel planted. It's still blooming, and I think that also the life cycle of this project, the things that are dawning on me, that are different about it, as it's progressed, is that it doesn't seem to have the same life cycle as a regular album, where it's like, oh, okay, here are the songs that I wrote during this era, released it, toured with it, and now moving on to the next thing. There is something that feels timeless, because it's a piece of a tribute to Isabel that will continue. I think we'll continue to work on it indefinitely. We'll
Yes.
continue to put it out there and be be doing performances of it and exhibitions of it, and
It definitely feels that way
that's
too.
an incredible thing.
Absolutely. And it has already fed into the next project that I'm doing, which is the Witch Sister Tarot. And actually, there is a lot of Isabelle material that has found its way into that, and is having extended life already. So
I think, well, that is it. The High Priestess. That's
yeah,
inspired by also the same sort of album shot of the skull.
absolutely. It's the same
And I think that's
same
just such a
pose.
perfect fit.
Yes.
Yeah, the High Priestess.
So I think I could talk about this all day, and I think you could too. And
Yes.
it's been really lovely actually to do this.
It's always lovely to visit Isabelle.
But I time wise, I think the sands of time are running away from us.
Yes.
So I'd like to thank you for joining us today. This has been
It's my
amazing.
pleasure. Truly my pleasure.
And I'd like to close with something sad, but that I feel I really want to just offer a tribute to Andy Guthrie of the Scottish Pagan Federation, who was a real shining light of the organisation, who was a real supporter of this project. And just to say how sad I was to
Beautiful
learn of
human.
truly beautiful human who left us a few days ago, and just to give him our love.
Yes, and it looked like a beautiful life. And he came to the table when I was it 2 years ago at
Yeah.
at the conference, and just a human who instantly is beaming a light
Oh, so
and
much
very
so.
aware of the Isabelle project and very much saying,
Very
ladies,
much.
when are we going to get this?
We were chided, I think, a
Kept us on
couple
our
of times.
toes.
Yes, absolutely. And
He said, I'm
last,
waiting.
so I think that's
So
a nice
yes,
place to say goodbye
definitely.
for today. And yeah, so
Okay.
thank you
Thank you.
everybody for joining us.
Yes,
And
thanks for inviting me from over the ocean.
okay, thank you so much, and goodbye.